Greetings and welcome to another installment from the Patchwork Productionz Learn to Crochet for Beginners series. In this video, you will learn about blocking. For those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Stitch, and Patchwork Productionz is all about learning and doing crochet. So make sure you subscribe so you never miss another installment. Without further ado, let's get started. So for this video, we're not actually going to be working with any yarn or hooks. Well, yarn in the traditional sense. We're going to be learning about blocking. So you're going to need something that you can stick some pins into. A previous piece of work, in this case I'll be using a pot mat that I made from a previous tutorial video. You'll need some rust-proof pins, which I have several, just some generic pins you can see here, and either a bucket of water, a spray bottle of water, or an iron. And this may seem a little confusing, but let me explain. Blocking is a process that you do to a piece of crocheted work that allows you to, in a way, shape it. This is more of minute changes, and you would typically do blocking for like this pot mat here, for example. It's simple enough. All I'd have to do is, if I want it straightened, this would be a reason to block it so it looks, you know, straighter, neater. If it has any excess curls, that will remove it. If I am making, say, a sweater, I would have, you know, the sleeve and then the body, all these different pieces that have to be joined together. I would block those pieces before joining them to make them the proper shape, because even though, you know, you use a swatch and you know, have the right hook size and everything, the crochet may have slight warping in it. As you can see here, there's a slight bow right there. When we made this, as we were making it, had a little twist to it. The twist has kind of gone away for me now because it's stayed relatively flat. But these are all reasons that you would want to block your work. It kind of uses water to, in a way, set the little fibers, sometimes improving its drape. You know, there are several reasons why we would want to block a project. Now, I will say right off the bat, blocking isn't permanent unless you do it wrong in the case of steam blocking, which I'll explain the 3 different typical methods for blocking. But blocking isn't permanent. You can just block it. Say I'm making a blanket for someone and I want to give it to them. Oh, I might block it before I give it to them so, you know, it looks nice. But, you know, maybe after they wash it or something, it'll be a regular blanket, wear and tear, etc. But if you do it wrong, and as I said, with steam blocking, it can end up being permanent. So let me explain. There are 3 different methods to blocking that are generally done. There is steam blocking, which uses an iron. And I'll say immediately that you must be very careful because, you know, irons are hot, the steam can burn. So just putting that out as a disclaimer right now. There is spray blocking, so you spray your work. And then there's wet blocking, which is only slightly different. It's where you actually put your project in water for a period of time, and then block it. So one of the ways you can do wet blocking is actually washing your project and then, you know, wet blocking it by the procedure I'll show you in this video. So with steam blocking, because it uses heat and steam, this is cotton, so it's not as bad. But if I have a synthetic fiber, like acrylic, maybe polyester, the heat, if done wrong, can actually, it's what's called killing the fibers. It starts to partially melt it, and it loses its springiness. Let me just get a random piece of, here's a granny square I have that's acrylic, and you can see it has this kind of stretch to it. If I start to melt these fibers, that stretch will kind of go away. It'll be more of a static position, length, if you would. It can increase the drape heavily. There are some scenarios where you'd want to kill your fibers, but generally you want to avoid this. Of course, in the case of this pot mat, because it's made of cotton, it's not nearly as bad, but you still want to be careful with that. So we shall begin learning how to block our work. The first method I will show you will actually be the steam method. I'm doing it in a certain order for my own convenience, but I'll just quickly set up an ironing board here as opposed to this little foam block that I have, because this is basically plastic and I do not want to put heat near this. So just give me one moment to switch the scene. Alright, so we have a little scene switch here, and I have an ironing board under here and my pot mat. And basically the way any of these blocking processes work, but especially the steam, it's applying some amount of moisture to the project, stretching the project to the desired shape, and letting it dry out. Now, something that would be really important to have is a ruler, because if you want to stretch this to a more accurate shape, so let's measure this just to see what it is, and I'll do it from the edge. So it's 6.5 inches, but let's say it was 6.25 inches. So it's not quite a half. I can use blocking to stretch it just that extra bit to the right size. Now with blocking, you can adjust its size larger, but you can't adjust its size smaller. So I can't say, oh, I don't want it 6.5, I want it 5.5, or even 6. You can't do that. If you're gonna block to adjust size, it can only be larger, because this can stretch quite a bit. You could force it to be larger, but to force it to be smaller is just a bit sad for the poor project. So that's generally the rule. You stretch it if you want it larger, but usually blocking is just used for fine adjustments. If you did your swatch wrong and made your project a completely wrong size, it would not be advisable to block it just to stretch it to the size that you want. It'd be better to just do the project over with the appropriate sizes and then leave blocking for the finishing touch, make it look professional, and add that extra tweak that you might need. So for me, I'm not going to be very picky with my size, so I'm not going to need the ruler. But if you are making, say, a sweater and you have the sleeve and the body and you need to eventually join those and you're going to block your individual pieces and they're supposed to be a certain size, it would be a good idea to block them just to that size, so when you go to stitch them together to join them, it's a lot easier, a lot cleaner. But for me, I'm just going to worry about the shape, so I want it to look more rectangular. So we're going to take our pins, and I don't really have a very good surface for pinning on this ironing board, on account of, me not wanting to burn my foam block, but I will do the best I can to demonstrate this for you. Let's see what we can do here. So I have one pin in this corner, one pin in this corner, and let's see how I can move this pin. Okay, I think this is better. And the reason, of course, you use rust-proof pins as opposed to any regular pin is because we're using a lot of water. You would not want your project to have little rust stains in it from the pins, because you leave that water in there until it, naturally evaporates. So this is important. So the steam demonstration isn't going to be as good as the other ones on the account that I cannot pin as nicely, but it'll give you the general idea for the other ones. So now we've pinned our 4 corners where we'd want it. If you were measuring, you would make sure that your first pin is, of course, at the 0 or whichever marker you started with, and then at the next point. And surprisingly, I actually have 6 3/4 inches. So it's actually pretty consistent with an actual number. Now we have the corners in. We add extra pins, any extra pins that we want to adjust the, side. So if you think the side is fine, perhaps you won't put any. If you think not, you will add where you need the adjustment. If it needs to be a little forward, sometimes you can do it to be a little back. It all depends. But basically, you just add your pins. I'm just going to add a few for the purpose of demonstration. When I move on to spray and wet blocking, I will do this a lot better for your sake. But this is the general idea. You put your pins, and so now your project is, where it's supposed to be. Now what you will do is you will take your iron, just have an iron here, and let me get it till it's on. There's two ways you can do this. If you have a steamer, this would be of course better, and you use the steamer in the same way I'm about to show you how to use the iron. Some irons have a steam function. Now this iron does not have a steam function. I've had irons that do, where you'd push a button and it would let out a little steam jet. This one does not appear to have that, but it does have a dial setting here. Oop, and there it goes. This dial setting allows you to set the various temperatures. The lower temperatures do not have a steam setting. Let's make sure you can see that. But at the higher temperatures, that little puff icon tells you that at these temperatures, when the iron's held down, it will automatically let out steam. So while I don't have a button I can press, it will let out steam. Now again, I will make this very clear. Irons are very hot. The burns are very bad. I've been burned pretty bad with irons. So please be careful when using an iron. Touching any part that's near the heating elements can burn you. The steam as well is very hot, so be sure to steer clear of it and not get too close. And now we shall begin. You want to hold the iron, or the steamer, about half an inch to an inch above your project. And what this will do is that steam's going to come and start to slightly moisten, soften, and loosen up the fibers of your yarn, of your project. And as that water's in there, it will then it'll saturate it slowly. The heat will also help, and then you leave it to dry. So you just do this for a little bit. Now, again, if you're doing this with acrylic yarn or any synthetic yarn, you want to be very careful not to get it too close or not to have it touch, because it will kill the fibers, or it will just simply burn and melt the yarn. So of course I have cotton yarn, so it's not as bad, but I'm still going to try to avoid touching the yarn. And so you just do this for a little bit. Now be careful, this your project will be pretty hot after doing that, so don't just readily touch it. But when it cools down a little, you can already feel that it has some moisture. So you just want to do it till not slightly damp, but if you want to compare it to a time, you could do it for about a minute or two. And I think my iron just turned off, but you'll get the idea. It's still steaming. Oh, there we go. It's on. So you just want to do this, and as that steam and heat is in your project, it will loosen those fibers, and then because you have those pins defining where your shape is, it will set the shape of your project. And so you'll just leave that to dry, and then when it's fully dried, you'll be able to remove those pins, and your project will be steam blocked. It'll look the nice shape that you have it. Again, it's not permanent unless you kill the fibers in the case of a synthetic yarn, but it's not completely permanent. It's just to give it a nice look before you deliver it or use it, or etc. It's not completely necessary, but it's a good idea, especially if it's for professional kind of work, if maybe you're selling your garments or your crocheted work, or as a gift. It's just to make it look presentable. So I'll change the scene and we'll move on to spray blocking. Alright, so now we're back with our little foam board. Now, I will also mention there are products on the market that aren't as simple as this. This is not actually anything official. It's just a foam board happened to have from some package that was opened. And they actually, on the market, have official blocking boards, panels, I'm not sure what you call them. If anyone is interested in having me test one of those, use one of those, and show how one of those has worked, just let me know in the comments. But for now, this is fine. If you have maybe a cork board or something, that's a good option. Anything that won't absorb the moisture heavily, so maybe not a towel or something. But I just have a nice foam board. It's high density, so that's just what I'm going to use, and the pins will stick nicely into it. And so for spray blocking, we're going to do a similar process. We're going to start by pinning our project. If you want it to be a certain size, you can just use your ruler and insert your pins. And for the sake of instruction, I will demonstrate that. And let's see if I can get it to 7 inches. I'm going to see how that works. So we're going to take our first pin, stick it in our corner, and we're going to stick it in at the 0 mark on my ruler. And now that we've got this pin in, I'm going to take the next pin and put it in my corner. If I can get through, make sure we're there, and we're going to put it at the 7-inch mark. Okay, so that's stretched down there. Let's stretch it along this side now, because this is supposed to be mostly square, but I didn't quite do that. So this side will just have to be, I'll make it 6.5 inches. If you're not concerned about size, more concerned about shape, you don't have to worry about using the ruler. But if you're concerned about the size, then definitely use a ruler. And 6.5 is a little hard to get to. I'll stick with 6.25. Of course, these are just arbitrary numbers I'm picking. I don't actually care for this size. It's just to do a slight demonstration on what it would be like if you were having to do actual measurements. So this one is supposed to be 7. And let's move this loop out of the way. Oops, not quite. If you need to, add a slight angle to your pins let me just demonstrate here. Do it so that the pins would go this way and not this way, so that there's kind of a tension between the pull of the project and the foam holding it, so it kind of stays in place better. And now this side, I don't know if it's right, and it is not quite 6.25. It's actually more than 6.25. So how am I going to rectify this? Wait, no, it's actually less than 6.25. So I'm going to pick up my pin and move it up. So now that should be 6.25. This should be 7. Good. So now, as you can see, because I've stretched it, there are these extra curves. And so now I can add extra pins to adjust these curves. I'm going to start in the center and see what that does. So I'll probably need to add 2 extra pins. It's not the best, but I'm not too concerned. Of course, if you want a better result, being more precise would be very beneficial. I'm going to go over here, put this in the middle. put this here. So basically the point of this process is just to set the shape that we want our project to be finalized in, if that makes any sense. Let's put it over here. For the sake of time and the fact that I am running out of pins, I won't bother to make this any more defined in terms of adding more pins to make that look straighter, because I have a quite large project. Be sure to have a large supply of pins, because if you're dealing with something much larger than this, you're going to need quite a bit to make it look, you know, reasonable. So now this is the shape that I want it to be set in. And for spray blocking, I've heard it two ways. You can saturate your work, which is what I generally do just because I am typically heavy-handed with applying things. Or you can just spray it so that it's damp. I'm not actually sure which one is per se the correct way. But the point is just to have it get the water. Again, same concept with the steam. It'll loosen the fibers, and then when it dries, it'll be set into the position that you've set it, that you've pinned it at. I'll saturate it just because that's the way I like to do things. So basically, you just spray it nice and good so that it's wet. You can see that dampness in it. And you don't have to use anything fancy. Cold water works. Maybe if you want to use warmer water to make it do this a little faster, I guess it's up to you. And my sprayer sounds quite like a duck. And so now you just leave that to dry, basically. And when it's dry, you just pull out the pins. Your project is set. Now, for wet blocking, my setup won't change terribly much because there's only one difference. The difference is that first you would soak this in a bucket of water. So I just have a little tin on the floor here with some water that I would soak this in. And then I would take a towel, just grab a towel here. I would take a towel and I'd actually dampen out the project before pinning it. So you would soak your project for about 5-10 minutes in the water. Then you would take it out, gently squeeze it, and then you would put it in this towel to dry. So I'm going to demonstrate that for your sake. Of course, after you do that, you would just pin it up just like this. So let me pull this out and show you the wet block setup. So this is my bowl of water, which I really don't need something this large, but it's just a convenient bowl. And you would just place your work inside and soak it for, 5 to 10 minutes. This gets all the fibers nice and saturated with all that nice water. Again, cold water will be fine. Perhaps if you want to use warm water to make this process a tad faster, that should be okay. But you just let it soak in here for the purpose of the tutorial. I'm not gonna soak it, but you would take it out and gently squeeze it. You don't want to like wring it or something. That will definitely change the shape of your project. And you can see here, perhaps, I don't know if it shows on camera, but there are some parts that aren't fully wet. And this is the reason we soak it. Now this is cotton yarn, which could be different from maybe acrylic, but then again, plastics don't hold water the same way as natural fibers. So this is the reason we soak it, so that every single last bit of the fibers properly get all the water. Again, as I said, for the purpose of the tutorial, I'm not going to soak it for that long, but then you gently squeeze out some of the water. And then, let me just move my bowl out of the way. you take a towel and you just put in that towel and get out some more of the excess water from your project just by a little, patting, not squeezing or wringing, but just gently, pressing it, getting out some of that excess water. So it's similar to the spray method for blocking. In some ways, this could get out more of the water because the other one, you just spray it to saturate it, unless you sprayed it to dampen it, which I guess that works too. So after you do this, you would then pin it onto your board in the desired shape that you would like to block it. I'm not going to do that again because I showed you how to do that with the spray blocking. It's basically the same thing. But this is how we do blocking for crochet. Again, its primary purpose is to make the project look neater, have a defined shape. If you want to correct something, as I said, when we were making this pot mat, which if you haven't seen that video, I encourage you to check that out. But you'd see that it was curling during the making process and it kind of had a curl afterwards. You could block it if you wanted to correct that curl. If the shape wasn't quite the way you wanted, or the size was, ever so slightly off, you could block it for that reason. If you're making a gift, and you want to present something professional looking, you would block it. If you wanted to improve the drape of something, how well it drapes, you could block it for that reason as well. I might do a future tutorial video on what happens when you kill your yarn and how that could be used, but I won't cover that for now, except that most times you want to avoid it. So those are all the basics. Again, this was a pot mat made with cotton yarn, but if you're doing acrylic, if you're doing nylon, polyester, a bamboo, a silk, it doesn't really matter what yarn you're using. Wool, you can block your work. The type of yarn doesn't matter. You can even steam block all of those yarns. Just with the synthetic ones, you'll need to be a lot more careful unless you're going for a certain result by killing the yarn. Otherwise, you could just wet block it. You could spray block it. There's a nice variety of options that you could use to block any type of yarn for any type of project that you'd want. So for now, that will be all for this tutorial. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this tutorial and want to learn more about crochet, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another video. Don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and also share this video with your friends and family or on social media. And feel free to leave a comment down below. If you have any questions or suggestions or any feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, catch you later.